I think that most people are misdiagnosing the cause of their laziness and lack of discipline because most people think they need an insane morning routine or some productivity system or just that they need to change their habits in general to stop being lazy and finally become productive. But honestly, I don't think that most people are actually lazy or undisciplined. Like, I don't think it's an actual character trait that anyone's born with and that they're destined to become lazy or undisciplined. And in this video, I want to discuss one of the big problems that I think is causing most people to feel this way about themselves and then as a result become unproductive and undisciplined. And it's more so biological than mental or spiritual. And it has to do with the literal function of dopamine. So, for example, let's talk about the morning, right? Most people have done this before. Maybe you're past this now, but a lot of people spend the morning, the first thing they do is grab their phone, right? They'll check their notifications. Maybe they'll check Instagram. Not maybe, they definitely check Instagram. That's like the first thing you do. Then maybe TikTok, then YouTube Shorts. Then maybe there's a group chat with some messages that you need to respond to. Then a random drama video pops up, then a funny video, and it kind of just like it never ends. You're in this endless loop of just the feed showing you exactly what you want to see. So you end up just maximizing your stimulation first thing in the morning, say half an hour later, whatever, however long you spent scrolling in the morning. It's time to actually do something productive. Anything after that is going to seem mundane, right? Because you just stimulated your mind by seeing honestly more things than 2 generations ago would have ever seen in 10 years. Like, you could see a video of Messi scoring a nice goal. Then you could see someone posted up in Ibiza at a steakhouse. And then you might see an interview of Brad Pitt, or like you just see so many things on your feed that you wouldn't be able to see, that wouldn't be able to stimulate your mind. So essentially, you just spent that first part of your morning stimulating yourself more than any of the tasks that you're going to be doing throughout the day that are actually productive are going to stimulate you. So they then all start to seem mundane, and it kind of feels a little bit less exciting to do them. Now, I'm not saying a little 20-minute doom scroll in the morning is just the end of the world and you're not going to be able to be productive throughout the day, but it's the accumulation of that habit over the course of many years, and not just in the morning, but throughout your day, constantly the mindset of just trying to maximize stimulation whenever you can. It's going to have this negative effect as time accumulates. And I used to do this all the time, especially as a student back in the day. I'd wake up, what would I do? Check my phone, see who Snapchatted me or Instagram DM'd me, whatever. Bounce between apps, watch videos. Because whenever you go on Instagram, you're not just checking a DM, right? Sometimes you don't even make it to the DM. You go on Instagram, you open up the app, and you see something on your feed that's interesting before you can even make it to the DM. That's how good these algorithms are. And then you get caught in this scroll, and then 5 minutes later, you forget why you even went on Instagram. So you close the app, and then you reopen it because you're like, oh yeah, I had to check that DM. And then maybe you get caught in another scroll after that. Hopefully not, but that's happened to me many times. And then maybe you go on YouTube after, or you go on TikTok, or just honestly anything to stimulate your brain, because it's like an addiction, right? Whenever you get that first bit of stimulation, your brain wants more. So you're kind of like, it's almost like an allergy of the brain. You just want to keep getting more and more. So imagine, the first 30 minutes, hour of your day is just the most amount of stimulation you're going to get. Then it's time to go to school, sit down and listen to whatever class that you don't care about. It's going to be super hard to focus, right? Because your brain has just had all this stimulation and it's craving more and more. Your mind's just starting to wander and just try and figure out ways to stimulate itself rather than focus on the mundane, boring task in front of it. And the annoying part about this is that you don't really notice it while it's happening. You're essentially depleting your brain's life force, which is dopamine, right? And then when it's, like I said, when it's time to sit down and actually do the work that you need to do for whatever it is, school, your job, studying, anything, it feels like you can't focus. You're constantly wanting to go grab your phone. You're constantly looking for stimulation in other places. Sometimes, hell, it's even better to just sit down whenever you're doing a homework task or something that you don't want to do. Sometimes you'd rather just sit there and just stare and let your brain think of things or find ways to stimulate itself than actually do the work. Doing the work is harder because you actually have to focus on it and it's not stimulating your mind. So then naturally, when you live like this, and this is something that accumulates over time, you just think that you have a discipline problem or that you're lazy. But then the more I looked at it and I looked into this and I tried to understand why I feel this way, and why, if most people are being honest, they feel this way too. A lot of people want to lie to themselves and say like, oh, I'm not lazy, I'm not undisciplined. But it's like, let's be honest. Like, if you have to sit, most people these days, if they have to sit down and do a 5-minute task that requires no stimulation, they can't even do it. Like, yeah, they can go to work all day and do the task that they literally have to do to survive. Sure, that's, understandable. But like when it's time to do something that actually requires attention and focus that doesn't directly tie to something you need to do, it's just something that would be productive, then they can't do it. So I'm not saying that this is the whole problem, but it is a huge component. Like when I started looking into like how dopamine works and everything, and I know that dopamine's like this huge kind of buzzword online now, especially since Andrew Huberman, everybody talks about, dopamine detox this, how to reset your dopamine, dopamine's the problem. Like it is technically true. It's kind of overdone and it's cringe at this point. But when you actually understand the mechanism behind it, it is true. Like dopamine is responsible for not just like the pleasure you experience in life, but for your motivation, excitement, just your general mood throughout the day. So sure, if I'm just overstimulating my brain and maximizing the amount of dopamine I release on a daily basis, whenever it's time to then sit down and do a task that isn't as exciting as that, you're gonna feel less motivated because you have less of your motivation resource, being dopamine, available to you. Now, I'm not saying you need to become a monk who, wakes up at 4 a.m., eats plain chicken, stares at a wall, and just never has fun again. Staring at a wall, actually, I really like that. I've been doing this lately, and it actually is a great reset. I'll talk more on it later, but definitely something you should give a try. But I'm not saying you need to do all this stuff because that seems like a terrible way to live, right? Even if you do it just for a season, just to reset, it can be good. But I don't think it's really necessary to do a full 3-week or even 3-month dopamine detox. The way I like to look at it more now is think of it like a dopamine budget, not a detox, because I think it makes more sense this way. The way that dopamine functions essentially, just for all intents and purposes, is you have a limited amount throughout the day. It does replenish on a day-to-day, on a weekly basis. So it's not a non-renewable resource. It is renewable, but you have a finite amount per day, which is why I call it a budget. So think about it like this. The more dopamine you have available to you, the more motivated you're going to feel, the more sensitive to the smaller joys and pleasures of life you're going to be. This is why, thinking about it like that, logically, if you wake up in the morning and your first thought is, okay, I'm craving some stimulation right now. Every doom scroll, every hour you spend, every video you watch that stimulates you is draining that dopamine a little bit more and a little bit more. And this is why the mindset of just stimulate as much as possible whenever you have 5 seconds or a break at work or your lunch break can be very harmful, because you're just depleting that resource that allows you to experience life, essentially enjoy it, and also be motivated to do things that are going to lead to a more meaningful life. A good analogy I like to use for this that kind of articulates it well is video games. So if you're part of my generation, you definitely played video games growing up, especially if you're a guy, but I'll use FIFA because I played FIFA growing up. That was like my favorite game. However, it'll make sense for any video game, trust me. But with FIFA particularly, let's say there's this game mode called Foot Champs, right? So essentially Foot Champs is a game mode where you have 30 games for the weekend. And basically, depending on how many wins you get out of 30 games, you get a certain reward based on the rank or the level that you finish at. Now, whenever the weekend league would come around, which is what it was called, the weekend league, because it would happen from Friday to Sunday, I'd be really excited to start playing because I'd want to get rewards and improve my team. And of course, the game was also fun to play. That was just a bonus. So you start playing. The first game is extremely fun, really exciting. Same for game 2, game 3. But let's say somewhere around game 7, okay? Now, depending on how well you do, of course, if you start losing every game, it just becomes extremely miserable to play. But let's say you're on a streak, you're on a 7-0 streak. You'll probably want to keep playing because you're getting dopamine just from winning. But the actual game itself is becoming less enjoyable. You get to a point where you're kind of just mashing buttons on a controller and you're not really thinking about the game the way you did in the first game. You're not really focusing on every pass, every shot, every decision you make in the game. It kind of just becomes almost on autopilot. You're kind of just passing, pressing X, shooting here, and yeah, you're winning, so you keep playing, but the game's not enjoyable. Like, you're at the point where if you lost, you would just stop playing immediately because the only dopamine you're getting is from winning at that point, not really playing the game. Whereas if you lost your first game, you'd be disappointed, but playing the game itself was still exciting. It was still fun because you just started, and so you would keep playing. You wouldn't just get off. But once you're on a streak of like 7, 8, 9, 10 wins, The only reason you'd keep playing is because you're winning. You wouldn't just keep playing for the sake of it. That's why if you lost when you were on like a 10 streak, everybody knows this. Once you played so many games and then you lose, you're like, all right, I'm getting off, because you were just enjoying the winning. You weren't enjoying the game anymore. And the reason for that is because your dopamine, the dopamine response you were getting from playing, has been depleted basically to its limit at that point. You can't get any more. You had a finite amount, but it can renew, right? This is why taking a break is really effective. You might take a 2-hour break, come back, and then play. But it can only renew so much within the day. As I said, it's more of a day-to-day thing that it can renew. Sometimes it takes even longer. Like you might play so many games of FIFA that you don't want to play for like 5 days. Then you come back. But if you just take a 2-hour break and come back, you might enjoy it a bit more. You might play 2 games. You probably won't get the same amount of games as you did on the very first session, but you will be able to play a few more games because that dopamine has slightly reset. If you play Call of Duty or any other video game, I'm sure you experience the same thing. Like, let's flash back to 2020 when everybody was playing Warzone, right? I was literally playing Warzone for like 8 hours a day during 2020 with one of my friends. And eventually it got to a point, this is super fascinating, but we'd play for literally like 6-7 hours probably. There was nothing to do. We were just locked in the house and we weren't doing schoolwork. So we were just playing video games all day. It would get to a point where we just had to take a break. We were like, you know what, let's just take a break and we'll come back on, because the game wasn't fun anymore. When you're playing for 8 hours, you've depleted all of your dopamine. So you go and take a break. And when I say take a break, it's not like you just sit down and do nothing after, because like I said, once your dopamine is that depleted, you need more stimulation. So a break probably meant going to make a snack and watching Instagram or watching YouTube, because you still need stimulation. Trying to just sit in your own thoughts after 8 hours of maximizing dopamine on a video game is just too painful to do. So you would have to try and fill that void essentially. But what would happen is our breaks would be like 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, because there was literally nothing else to do. So we take a break because the game got boring, but then anything we did in between the break was too numbing that we ended up just texting each other and saying, yo, want to hop back on? And we would just hop back on and play for another 4 hours and not even really enjoy it that much. It's just that the alternative was too mind numbing to do anything else. So we just had to keep playing and trying to essentially chase that high. It's like a drug addict, right? Just, it's the same thing. You're chasing a new high of dopamine all the time. That's why the drug addict has to keep doing more and more and more. So the paradox essentially is that the more you try to entertain yourself with pure stimulation, the less you actually enjoy it. And this is actually interesting because I've heard people have the opposite perspective, which is like, if I have an hour to spare, life is short. Why would I not just stimulate myself as much as possible? Why would I not enjoy it? Go on a good Instagram doom scroll, eat the donut, watch the TV show. And on the surface, that's completely logical and I understand it, but I think it's fundamentally wrong when you understand how, like I said, neurochemistry actually works. There needs to be a balance of stimulation and no stimulation. The goal can't just be to maximize stimulation all the time, because then this depletes your ability to enjoy that stimulation later on. This is why a vacation can be so enjoyable after a long period of work, but eventually that vacation gets annoying if you stay for too long. People will think in their head, oh, if I could be on this vacation forever, it would be amazing. But that's not actually true. Maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3, but after a month on a resort, you're going to want to get back to your normal life and start doing, the tasks you do on a daily basis, maybe even your job if you don't hate it. And I think that's a good articulation of how this works on the micro scale by explaining it on the macro scale. Like, this is why the doom scroll in the morning is such a powerful way to describe this, because like you wake up in the morning, right? And before you've even had a clear thought of your own in your head, you're already letting the entire internet into your head first. You're getting color, movement, music, jokes, humor, drama, attractive people, social validation, random information, an entertaining sports clip, just every 3 seconds, just novelty. It's like it's like a dopamine button in your brain, and you're pressing it and holding it. Then you open up a blank document, a textbook, laptop, notebook, whatever task you have to do. Your brain's not going to want to do that. It's going to tell you to screw off, and that's why you're going to keep having this urge to go to your phone while you're doing the work, because it wants that stimulation, not the task in front of it. So you essentially just trained it right at the start of the day to expect life to feel like a slot machine. Your brain's like, whoa, this is what today's about? All this excitement, all this drama here, that video here, that actor did this today, that like all this like crap anyways, that doesn't matter. You've just trained your brain to think the whole day is going to be like that. But then you have to go do mundane tasks for 8 hours. It's not going to want to do it. It's similar to eating a bunch of candy before dinner and then wondering why the food doesn't taste that good, right? Like, there's so many examples of how this works that we understand that are more tangible, but it's harder to understand on the micro scale when it's not as tangible, like with scrolling Instagram or just stimulating yourself in any way you can, and then wondering why more mundane tasks, food, or whatever feels less exciting. So just like with the candy, you ruined your appetite for the actual tasty steak and potatoes. With stimulating yourself, you've ruined your appetite for effort and enjoyment. You spend all this energy, all this mental energy on cheap stimulation early in the day, then anything boring, slow, or actually meaningful feels like punishment. And then you think you're lazy or you're undisciplined because you can't get the task done. But it's not true. You hijacked your brain. You basically sabotaged yourself. And that's why the phone is so dangerous. It's not because one scroll ruins your life, obviously not. And you won't even notice the effect on like a day-to-day basis, but it accumulates, man. It accumulates over time. Like think about short form content versus a book. Like try to read a book after scrolling social media for an hour. Even just conversations feel slow to people. Cooking feels slow. Cleaning, all of these normal tasks that we could be enjoying on a daily basis just feel slow. You feel like you're constantly just operating at a lower level of enjoyment whenever you're trying to constantly stimulate yourself. People can't just walk or work out without blasting music. They can't just sit down with their own thoughts and just stare at nothing. So eventually, over time, what happens is normal life just starts to feel lower quality than it once was. And then we try to diagnose the problem elsewhere and think that it's a happiness problem, or maybe it's, I'm depressed or whatever. And it's like, technically, maybe you are depressed. It's because you've just depleted your dopamine source that you feel depressed all the time, right? So again, just to be clear, I'm not saying dopamine is bad, right? Dopamine is one of the things that makes life worth living, right? It's pleasure, but it's also drive, reward, excitement, motivation, learning. It's your life force, right? It's your desire to do everything. Without it, you don't just lose pleasure, you lose your desire to live and pursue something meaningful. So I'm not against dopamine. I'm actually super for dopamine. I'm against wasting it. Like I said, dopamine is kind of a finite and renewable resource at the same time. I know that's not a perfect neuroscientific explanation, and I'm not trying to pretend I'm a neuroscientist. It's just a practical way to think about it. Every morning you wake up with some level of motivation, emotional sensitivity. I hope so, right? And as you go through the day, different things raise you above that baseline. So look at your dopamine as a baseline level of just enjoyment and excitement about life throughout the day. And then certain things are going to raise that level, right? Food does it. Food will release dopamine depending especially on the palatability of the food. It's going to raise you above baseline. Scrolling social media will bring you above baseline. Exercise will bring you above baseline. Completing a difficult task even actually brings you above baseline. Although it's a different kind of release than a cheaper version of stimulation like social media or video games, which I'll discuss in a moment. But the interesting thing about it is that the easier and higher the spike is of dopamine above your baseline, the more likely it is to return faster and even drop below baseline. That's why I don't look at it as just harmless whenever you have a dopamine hit, as people call it. It's not really a dopamine hit. It's not how it works, but just like I said, for all intents and purposes, whenever you stimulate that dopamine above baseline, there's a cost to it. You don't just get to maximize pleasure for free. Sure, it feels free in the moment because all you have to do is open your phone, click the next episode, eat the donut, play the video game or whatever. But there usually is a cost after. It's just hard to notice. And again, why it's so harmful. You almost have to look at it similarly to money, right? Like you have to decide what you're going to spend your money on. There's certain things that just aren't worth it. They don't have the ROI. And there's other things that do. So it's like every time you have 5 minutes to spare during the day, or every time you have access to cheap stimulation, you have to decide whether it's worth it to spend that and then get the proportionate cost later on, because that's usually when it shows up. Or if it's worth it to just save that dopamine and let it work in another way, right? Or whether it's better to just save it and use it later. I know it sounds weird the way I'm describing this because I'm talking about dopamine, which is, yes, it's a real thing, but it's conceptual in nature because we've never really seen it and we don't see how it functions. I'm kind of just describing this intangible process to you, but I'm pretty sure by now with the analogies I've used, you do understand how it works. I'll try and use another example. So I talked about the vacation, how if you're on the vacation too long, you start to not enjoy it anymore. Let's look at it the other way around. Let's say you go on vacation and the vacation didn't last long enough. Like you went for 2 days and you were craving another 3 or 4 after that. Then you had to come back to work and it was pretty depressing. You only went on a 2-day vacation when you really wanted to go for a week. In that case, what happened was you spiked your dopamine very high on that 2-day vacation. It was very exciting. It was a novel experience. Let's say you went to a new place after, working the same job for 11 months straight doing the same thing every day, you finally had a novel experience. You finally did something exciting, and that 2 days was life-changing. So you really raised your dopamine far above its baseline. You then came home after 2 days craving more of that vacation. It wasn't enough yet to satisfy you. You came home, had to wake up and go to work the next day. That work day was probably a lot worse than most of the work days prior to the vacation, because your dopamine was still at baseline on every other day. But because you raised it so high during that vacation, it then proportionately dropped below baseline, which is why you felt a little bit lower after. This is a phenomenon we've all experienced. When you go to the club at night and you drink a lot of alcohol, there was music, there was dancing, there was just a lot of exciting things going on. So naturally, your normal day in comparison is going to feel less exciting. Your dopamine drops below the baseline and then has to take some time to recover before it can get back up. That's why it might take a week sometimes, or just even a couple days, to get back to your normal experience. Life can feel a little bit less exciting after a super intense raise above the baseline. Hence why that workday after the vacation is going to feel really low. Now, again, this is just a natural part of life. Of course, that doesn't mean don't take the vacation or don't do the exciting things sometimes. But on a day-to-day basis, there's just things that aren't worth it, in my opinion. Like scrolling in the morning is ruining your day because you're doing it right in the morning. Just doing anything that's cheap, that isn't actually providing any intrinsic value throughout the day, that's just for the purpose of stimulating you in the moment, I think could be saved and invested just like money for a later on experience, like that vacation, right? Like, for example, if I'm on my lunch break at work, do I need to scroll for an hour just to make that a little bit more exciting than just eating the food and relaxing for the hour? Like, no, I don't need to do that. I'm not getting any ROI on that except for pleasure in the moment. Whereas I wouldn't say don't go to Ibiza for the weekend and experience, the parties and just all the excitement from that, because what are you getting out of that? You're getting a lifelong memory. You're getting a very novel experience that you've never had before, hopefully with people that you care for and that your close friends that you're going to remember that experience for together for a very long time. That's something that's worth spending it on, even if it's going to make you feel a little bit lower the next few days, because that's something that's going to pay dividends emotionally in a way, right? This has actually turned out to be a really good analogy with the money. But yeah, essentially, you have to have a budget. You have to decide what's worth spending it on and when it's time to just save it and invest it for the future. Like, it's gotten to a point in modern society where it's hard to, like, people notice it and they talk about it, especially our older generations, like my parents. Like, they see the problem. They're like, you kids on the phone all the time, like, go outside. And they're right, even though they've kind of fallen victim to it now. A lot of the people my parents' generation have phones now, and ironically, they use it more, which kind of just goes to show, we're all human and we can fall victim to this stuff. Like, nobody's immune to it. It's kind of just a product of our time now. And unfortunately, we were kind of plagued by this, if you want to call it a disease or whatever. It's not like their generation was superior to ours, because now once they've been exposed to the same temptations, they also fallen victim to it. They're all on Instagram scrolling now too. But nobody's trying to claim superiority here. The point is, it's true though with our generation, like, you go out to group settings, like maybe at a restaurant, you see a group of 4 or 5 friends sitting together, but everyone's scrolling on their phone. Like, it's kind of actually sad when you think about it. People are physically with each other, the way humans are intended to be, communicating and engaging with each other, but mentally they're somewhere else because the phone provides more in the moment excitement than the people in front of them, which is insane. It's like, that scares me, right? This is what I mean by losing your ability to enjoy the simple things in life. Like, you're at a dinner table with your friends, and if the conversation pauses for a second before you give each other enough time to think of a new topic, you have to go on your phone and fill that void. You can't just sit there with your friends at the dinner table and enjoy their presence. You constantly need to have some form of stimulation on your mind. Your brain is just in a state where it constantly craves stimulation, and it's used to it because you give it to it, that you can't even enjoy the experience of being out with your friends at the restaurant. You can't eat without YouTube anymore. You can't walk without music or a podcast. And eventually it gets to a point where even your own thoughts become something you try to escape. This is why people can't just sit down with their own thoughts anymore, because it's too numbing to let your brain wander and think of things. Now, there is a concept of good versus bad dopamine, and I get why people say it. It is conceptually correct, but the better way to think about it is just cheap dopamine versus earned dopamine. Cheap dopamine is essentially a reward that you get without putting any effort in. Think about, scrolling Instagram, eating a donut, stuff like that. Earned dopamine is a reward that you get after effort. And this is actually really fascinating when I learned about this specific mechanism about how dopamine works, or the inferences we can make about it. Because like I said, cheap dopamine is scrolling, junk food, Netflix, video games, gambling, all that stuff, which gives you a reward right away without you putting in any effort and earning it. And this actually shows up differently in your brain or in your body when you measure dopamine. Because earned dopamine is obviously what you get from doing something difficult. Training, running, writing, doing difficult tasks, even just cleaning your room, playing a sport, just anything like that, right? If the activity itself is uncomfortable, but it was something meaningful and there was a reward after, it actually shows up differently in your brain and also in real life, right? Like after you eat a donut or doom scroll, you feel a little bit like icky and dirty after. You're like, yeah, that was good, but like I'm gonna pay the price. But if you do a run or a workout, or like I said, any difficult task, you finish that school project that took you a long time, the reward feels better. Like it feels worth it. We all know this is a real thing, that when we do the things we know we're supposed to do that improve our life, we get a better feeling after. It's a better reward than the cheap reward that was kind of just for pleasure, but we knew was going to feel bad afterward. It's almost like nature's way of telling us what we're actually supposed to be doing, how we're actually supposed to be living our lives. Like everyone knows that if you do a hard workout in the morning, you're going to feel euphoric for the rest of the day. Like this is a fitness channel where I talk about working out most of the time. And for all of us that do, we know how it is. Like one of the biggest reasons you stay in the gym after you've made most of your gains is just for the mental feeling. Like you literally feel euphoric after a workout. One of these dopamine rewards gives you pleasure without growth, and the other gives you reward because of growth. And it actually shows up in the brain differently. For example, I'll use the donut example. You eat a donut, you're operating at baseline dopamine, right? You eat a donut, you get a quick spike, and then you're right back down to baseline, maybe slightly below it. But a donut's probably not enough to take you below baseline. You're gonna spike above it, and then you're gonna come back down. Whereas if you do a 2-hour leg workout, that's painful in the moment. You're not getting dopamine spikes during the workout. But once that workout is complete, your dopamine spikes and it remains above baseline for multiple hours after that. It's almost like a slow, steady curve until it slowly gets back down to baseline. It's not a quick spike up and down. This is why you feel euphoric for multiple hours and typically the rest of the day after the workout, which is super fascinating to me. Now, I'm not saying the cheap version of the dopamine is to be avoided completely. There's always a difficult task that should be completed before you get that reward. For example, watching an episode of, your favorite TV show after a long day of work is different than watching 5 hours and binging an episode in the middle of the day on a weekend, eating Cheetos while avoiding all of the chores and errands that you had to run, right? There's a guilt associated with that. We all know this. So it's the same activity, same product essentially, but it's a completely different purchase if we're staying in line with the money analogy. One feels earned and the other feels like an escape. And your brain knows the difference. It's been proven. We've seen how dopamine responds in the brain. You can feel it. You don't even need science to prove this. We just need our own anecdotes. You can feel the difference between eating a good meal after a good training session and eating a random junk meal while you avoid your responsibilities. You can feel the difference between playing video games at night after you did all of the tasks you had to do for the day versus playing at 11 a.m. on a Sunday, avoiding all the things you don't want to start. So the question isn't necessarily how do I just avoid pleasure? Because that's a miserable question, right? The better question is this pleasure source worth the cost? Because some pleasure is absolutely worth it, of course. A trip with your friends, like I said, that pays emotional dividends. A great meal can be worth it. A night out can be worth it. A sport you love can be worth it. A movie that actually gives you something to think about can be worth it. But a lot of cheap stimulation doesn't pay you back in any way. And that's when I think it should be avoided. Because all it really does is take your attention, scatter your mind, lower your motivation, and reduce your sensitivity to meaningful experiences later on. It's like buying junk that breaks immediately. You get the tiny excitement of buying it, but then it's gone. So before you spend dopamine, I think it's worth asking, am I actually buying something here, or am I just leaking it essentially? Like, am I creating a memory? Am I earning a reward? Am I recovering? Am I connecting with someone? Am I learning something? Am I improving? Or am I just numbing myself because the current moment feels slightly uncomfortable? Again, I'll use the video game example. When you first get on the video game, the first hour or two is really fun. But after that, it gets a little bit numbing, right? You get to a point where you kind of just want to get off and take a break. It's not the same level of excitement the whole night. The first game of FIFA is not the same as the 10th. First game of COD is not the same as the 10th. Essentially, the premises is that doing the same pleasurable thing over and over doesn't give you the same reward every time, even though we naively think that it will. And this is why I think the budget analogy is so good, right? Like it's not that you have one fixed amount of dopamine and then you're done forever, right? It renews. It renews, just like your paycheck, right? Maybe you get paid every 2 weeks and your tire just popped on your car. So now you depleted your bank account and you're kind of just hovering at baseline. But after next week, you're going to get your paycheck again. Dang, this money analogy really aged well, better than I thought it would. But the problem is most people never actually reset. They finish playing the video game, then they pick up the phone. They finish scrolling on one app, they open another. They finish working, then immediately consume content. They finish watching Netflix, then they go to bed scrolling. So their brain never has a chance to come back down. They just keep switching stimulation sources. And as I said in the beginning of the video, I think this is one of the biggest problems that people have right now. Most people are not taking breaks, they're taking stimulation swaps. Laptop to the phone, phone to Netflix, Netflix to video games back to social media, then a cookie, and they call it relaxing. And that's another huge topic, stimulation versus relaxation. People confuse relaxation with stimulation, but true relaxation is the absence of stimulation because like you can work, let's say you work for 20 minutes, you're studying and you do 20 minutes on, 5 minutes off. In that 5 minutes, if you're scrolling aggressively through social media, you might actually come back feeling worse. I've had this experience. Like you think it's going to improve your focus because you took a break, but it didn't because again, you stimulated your brain beyond what it's going to experience during that studying session. So you're just going to come back even less focused. This is a huge trap we fall for in modern society. Relaxation versus stimulation. Stimulation is not relaxation. I would consider a real break to be walking without your phone, sitting in the sun, drinking water, stretching, just staring at the wall for crying out loud. Maybe just going outside for 5 minutes without music. Just letting your thoughts wander just for a little bit. And I know that sounds terrible, right? That sounds so boring in modern society. But that boredom is part of the reset. The boredom is required for your brain to come back down. A lot of people say they're burnt out these days, and maybe they are, to be fair, but I wonder how much of it is actually burnout from the work they're doing and how much of it is burnout from constant stimulation and literally frying your dopamine receptors. Because like I said, from the second you wake up, if you're checking notifications, watching videos, listening to music, podcasts, messages, news, shorts, group chats, all that stuff, even when you're resting, you're consuming. Your brain's never getting that silence and ability to experience an absence of stimulation and then allow it to return to baseline. It's funny because I was talking to a friend the other day and I was telling him about my new experience with just doing nothing in the morning, like basically locking myself in a room and staring at a wall for 30 minutes just as an experiment, which I know sounds insane, but I have been doing that actually, and it's kind of been actually pretty revolutionary. Essentially, I just try to create pockets of no stimulation, no phone, no music, no video. Like I always used to have a video on when I was cooking or while I was eating or just trying to fill in all the gaps, but I consciously try to avoid that now just to kind of reset and actually genuinely relax. And when I told him that, he was confused. He was like, why are you doing that? What's the point of that? It sounds like a waste of time. And I get it. I was like, yeah, I understand why you would say that. And on the surface, he was right. He's like, life is short. Why spend 30 minutes doing nothing when you could be enjoying yourself, stimulating yourself? You can never get that time back, right? But I think, again, based on the video that you've just listened to, that way of thinking is kind of the trap because you're confusing all stimulation with enjoyment of life. It assumes that the fault is that it assumes if you're not actively consuming something pleasurable, then you're wasting life. But based on everything I've explained, those 30 minutes of no stimulation are an investment to better experience later on or just making the rest of your day better. Like I said, every piece of stimulation has a cost. Scientifically, it's literally shown your dopamine will raise above baseline and then drop below it, and then it has to renew. It operates essentially like a budget. So what if that 30 minutes in the morning makes my work feel easier, more enjoyable, my food tastes better, my thoughts clearer, my mood more stable, and just my life more enjoyable? Then is it time wasted? I wouldn't look at it as time wasted in that case. I would look at it as an investment. And that's something I didn't understand before, right? Empty time is not automatically wasted time. Sometimes empty time is what allows your brain to reset so the next thing can actually feel rewarding again. Now, I'm not saying everyone needs to stare at a wall for 30 minutes every morning. It's probably not selling the point of the video, but I do think consciously trying to avoid certain times of stimulation and consciously have moments of just emptiness and sitting with your thoughts can be very beneficial in modern society. Like, think about it. How often do you actually have time to just think from your own mind instead of just constantly having psychic entropy 24/7, reacting to whatever the internet puts in front of you, just listening to other people's opinions all day. And sure, listening to different opinions, taking in the information and then forming your own opinion is critical. But how often do you just spend time thinking yourself based on your own experience? You work 8 hours a day, so you're just focused on whatever task you have to do. You come home and you stimulate yourself for the rest of the hours of the day until you sleep. You're never just in your own mind. Like, your mind is so powerful, and I think you can have so many good experiences and thoughts and ideas by just sitting down and almost just meditating in a way, like just letting your brain wander on its own. It's so powerful, and it's almost like it's being suppressed every day by all of this external information when you could just be utilizing it better. Now, I want to make this practical because I don't just want this to be a video where I say dopamine budget and then leave you with a cool idea but nothing to do with it. So basically, this is how I structure my day now. And just take this with a grain of salt. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I've looked into this quite a bit at this point, but I'm just a 22-year-old learning a lot still. So I'm just going to give you my opinion. Do with it as you will. And again, like I said, I'm not perfect. I do fall into these patterns sometimes. I do fall victim to the doom scroll because I am a human. But that's why I've built my environment in a way that protects me as much as I can from myself, essentially, a little bit. Now, the biggest thing is the morning time. I protect my morning. I don't even enter the same room as my phone in the morning. And I know that sounds extreme, but I know myself. If the phone is beside me, it's too easy to check it. And once I check it, my mind is not the same. I've already let the outside world into my head before I've done the thing I actually care about. So I wake up and I go straight to my computer to write. I don't even eat. I don't allow any stimulation before work right in the morning. Writing is my highest leverage task, and I do it best when my mind is clear. I don't want Instagram in my head, group chats, random videos of people talking about Donald Trump or their opinion on why they think their diet is better. I don't need all of that information, which is then going to cause my brain to focus on those pieces of information when I need to just be focusing on what I need to do. I don't even want educational content in my head, because any type of content in your head is going to cause your brain to focus on that thing it just saw. And that creates noise. It's still someone else's thoughts before I've had the chance to form my own. So for the first 2 hours of the day, my mind is mine. That's the simplest way I can put it. I don't want the internet deciding what I think about. I don't want my phone deciding my mood. I want to use the cleanest part of my brain, fresh from sleep, that actually matters to me. So once I've done my first 2 hours of writing, then I'll grab some water, go out in the sun for maybe 30 minutes, and just let my mind wander. Don't even listen to anything. And honestly, I count that as part of work, because people only count work when it looks like work, typing, recording, editing, lifting, doing something visible. But a lot of good ideas come when you're not forcing them and actually relaxing, like I said, not stimulating yourself with content. They come from walking, sitting outside, getting sunlight, letting your brain just naturally do its things, making connections without constantly feeding it input. And then after that, I go back and do non-creative work, just tasks that need to be done, whether it's editing a video, recording, planning, posting content, things like that. And that usually takes me until afternoon, around 4 or 5. And by that point, I may have checked my phone briefly, but I haven't opened it and actually done anything. So at this point, I cook dinner, which is usually my one meal for the day, probably my first significant dopamine source. Most days now, I just eat without entertainment. Some days, like I said, I'll watch an educational video with it, but I try to avoid short form content like the plague. And yes, I know there's educational short form content. I post it myself, but let's be honest. Most people are not scrolling short form because they want to learn. They're scrolling for stimulation. And even if 1 out of every 10 short videos is useful, you're still feeding your brain a bunch of slop in between. And I don't want that slop in my brain. If you want to actually learn, long form is typically the way to go. And then after dinner, I'll usually work out or play a sport, typically tennis in the summer with my friends. It's honestly one of my favorite examples of earned dopamine because it combines so many good things at once. You're moving, competing, improving, laughing, getting annoyed, talking with friends, and doing something that actually gives you a better mood afterward. That kind of reward is incomparable to doom scrolling or any other cheap dopamine source. Then at night, once the important things are done, I might then allow myself to play a little bit of video games or watch something entertaining. And the funny thing is, I actually enjoy it more this way. People think that delaying the pleasure makes life worse, but in my experience, it actually makes pleasure better. And I know this because I used to actually live my life that way. On the weekends, I would think, oh yeah, I get to just dopamine max all day today. I get to start watching my Netflix series in the morning, whatever movie I want in the morning. I can start playing video games in the morning. But honestly, it just makes your day worse. You play that first 4 hours in the morning of video games or whatever. Now it's lunchtime on the weekend and you kind of just feel low for the rest of the day. You don't want to do anything else. I'm telling you guys, this is genuinely not the way to live your life. But again, yeah, I'm not trying to spend all my dopamine. I'm trying to spend it in the right order. That's really the key, guys. So if I had to turn this into a simple protocol, I'd keep it very basic, because the more complicated the system is, the less likely anyone's going to actually do it. So protect the first part of your day. The morning is most important. It's where you've replenished most of your dopamine and your mind is fresh because it hasn't had any entropy yet. Entropy meaning just outside external ideas and information flooding your brain. Just start with the first hour. If you work a job, before work, just shower, do your hygiene routine, maybe eat breakfast if you do that. If you don't, just don't stimulate your brain before. Let your brain wake up before you feed it the internet. So the first hour of the morning, at least protect it. Then effort before cheap pleasure. Do something difficult before you reward yourself. It could be anything. It doesn't even matter whether it's writing, working out, studying, cleaning, doing your job, recording, editing, whatever thing that you have to do that moves your life forward in your career path. That task depends on your life, but the principle is the same. And then earn the first reward of the day, because pleasure after effort hits so much differently than pleasure before effort. And then the third thing I would say is take real breaks. Work and rest are such a critical balance to have in your life. The work makes the rest better, and the rest makes the work better. However, real rest is not what most people consider rest these days. It's not switching from your laptop to your phone. It's letting your mind actually settle, letting it relax, walking outside, sitting in the sun, drinking water, stretching, breathing. Again, staring at the wall, for crying out loud. Let your mind wander. It's going to feel really boring and uncomfortable at first, but boredom is part of the rest. And then the fourth thing is just put the cheap dopamine later in the day. Make it the last thing you do. If you want to watch Netflix, play video games, eat some tasty food, or even scroll a little bit, which just scrolling, I don't know, man. Just forget about scrolling, but whatever. Just do it after the important things are done. This way, you're not asking your brain to go from high stimulation pleasure back into the difficult work. If it's the last thing you do, you could just go to bed right after, let your brain reset. You're using pleasure as a reward instead of letting it sabotage the rest of your day. And then fifth, I would say choose memories over numbness. So operate from a framework of, there's a time and place to spend a lot of dopamine. A trip with friends, a great meal, a night out, a sport you love, a real experience. Those things can be worth it. But be honest about the difference between a real experience, something that you're going to remember, or something that's just a quick, cheap escape. A weekend that becomes a story that you tell your grandkids is not the same as an hour of scrolling that you're not going to remember 10 minutes later. Like if I asked you, do you remember any of the videos you saw yesterday morning on your doom scroll? You're not going to remember any of them. It was just useless. It was just filling the void. So the final thing I'll say again is just treat your dopamine like a budget. Treat it like money. It's something that you need to thoughtfully consider what you spend it on, even though it renews periodically. Spend it on things that create memories, things that move your life forward, things that are meaningful. Don't use it to fill voids that then have a cost after. If you spend it on work that builds your future, training that improves your body, conversations that deepen your relationships, experiences that create memories and then emotional dividends later on, and rewards that come after effort, life starts to feel a lot different. Normal things start to become enjoyable again. And honestly, that's the real win. That was a long video. Those are my thoughts, guys. Thanks for listening. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you. And I'll catch you guys in the next video.